This video lecturette will review the comma rules. Many students find comma rules difficult because, simply put, there are just too many rules to be able to remember them all. When we think about where we use other punctuation marks like a period or an exclamation point or a question mark, they really only go in one place. I'm going to go over 9 different places where you can put a comma, and that doesn't even cover every single rule that's out there. Commas are tricky, and they cause a lot of students to have comma drama, extra commas, missing commas, and it can be very frustrating. Just relax and take a breath, and remember that if you ever get stuck and you're not sure where a comma goes, you can refer back to this video, to your notes, or to your textbook for a little bit of help. So the first comma rule we're going to talk about is commas in lists. The rule is to place commas between items in a list only when there are 3 or more items in your list. Here's an example. The baby fussed, cried, and finally fell asleep. To determine if I need a comma here, I need to figure out what the items in my list are. So what did the baby do? Well, the baby fussed, cried, and fell asleep. So the baby did 3 things. Because my comma rule says that I need a comma if there are 3 or more items, and I have 3 items here, I do need commas in my list. So I should have the baby fussed, comma, cried, comma, and finally fell asleep. Here's another example. She ate scrambled eggs and toast. In order to determine if I need commas in this sentence, I need to know how many things she ate. Well, she ate scrambled eggs and toast. That's only 2 items, so I don't need any commas here. The next comma rule that we're going to discuss is commas with conjunctions. So what's a conjunction? These are words that connect ideas or sentences or phrases. And to remember the conjunctions, you can think of the acronym FANBOYS. The conjunction words are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Here's the rule with commas and conjunctions. Place commas before conjunctions only when the conjunction connects 2 complete sentences. Here's an example. Tom showed up late for work often, so his boss fired him yesterday. In order to determine if I need a comma in the sentence, I first must find my conjunction, and in here that conjunction is the word so. Then I need to look at what's on both sides of so and see if they are each complete sentences. So first I have Tom showed up late for work often. That's a complete sentence. And then I have his boss fired him yesterday. That's also a complete sentence. I have a conjunction with 2 complete sentences on each side, so I do need a comma. So my sentence should read, Tom showed up late for work often, comma, so his boss fired him yesterday. I also have this example. I passed the English test but failed the chemistry test. In this example, my conjunction is the word but. And again, I need to see what I have before and after the conjunction but to be able to decide if I need a comma. Before but, I passed the English test. That's a complete sentence. After but, I had failed the chemistry test. That is not a complete sentence because it's missing a subject. Since my conjunction is not joining 2 complete sentences, I do not need a comma here. The next comma rule is commas with adjectives. Let's quickly review what an adjective is so that this rule makes sense. An adjective is a word that describes a noun, like big, small, fast, slow, so on and so on. The rule here is to place a comma between adjectives only when the adjectives do not form a single unit with a noun. Let's look at some examples. He has a thick, long, black beard. What are my adjectives in here? Thick, long, and black. So I need commas to separate those. My sentence should read, he has a thick, comma, long, comma, black beard. What about this example? He wears a scruffy long hairpiece. What is describing the piece? Is it just scruffy and long and then hairpiece, or is it scruffy, long, and hair describe piece? Here, this is an example where an adjective forms a single unit with the noun. Hair and piece refer to one whole thing, a hairpiece, so hair is not an adjective. My only adjectives then are scruffy and long, so I only need 1 comma. My sentence should read, he wears a scruffy, comma, long hairpiece. Now let's look at how to use commas with quotations. The rule is to use commas to separate quotations from the rest of the sentence. Let's do some examples together. Last night Harley said, invest in that stock, it's a sure bet. What I have in quotation marks is invest in that stock, it's a sure bet. So I should separate that from the rest of my sentence with a comma. And my sentence should read, last night Harley said, comma, invest in that stock, it's a sure bet. Sometimes the he said part of the sentence, which is called an attributive tag, comes at the end of the sentence like this. I'm not so certain of that, Ron responded. Well, we still need to separate our quote from the rest of the sentence with a comma, so our sentence should look like this. I'm not so certain of that, comma, Ron responded. At other times, our attributive tag is in the middle of the sentence. You better do it, Harley added, or you will be missing out on a lot of cash. Now I need to separate both parts of the quotation from the attributive tag with commas, so I'm going to need two commas here. You better do it, comma, Harley added, comma, or you will be missing out on a lot of cash. Our next comma rule is using commas to separate dependent clauses and phrases. A dependent clause is a part of a sentence that cannot be a complete sentence all by itself. This means if you remove that part of it, a dependent clause from a sentence, you still have a complete sentence left. Here are some examples. I really enjoy hanging out with my best friend, especially when we watch movies and pig out. First, we need to find what part of the sentence is the dependent clause. What can we remove from the sentence but still have a complete sentence left? In this example, it's the end of the sentence. The phrase, especially when we watch movies and pig out, is not a complete sentence by itself. And if we remove it from the sentence, what we have left is, I really enjoy hanging out with my best friend, which is a complete sentence. So that especially when we watch movies and pig out is a dependent clause, so I need to separate it from the complete part of the sentence with a comma. So this is what my sentence should look like. I really enjoy hanging out with my best friend, comma, especially when we watch movies and pig out. Here's another example. I have several hobbies like reading and playing video games. What is the dependent clause in here? Again, it's at the end. Like reading and playing video games. If I remove that from the sentence, what I have left is, I have several hobbies, which is a complete sentence by itself. Like reading and playing video games is not a complete sentence, so it's a dependent clause. I need to separate it from the independent clause with a comma. My sentence should say, I have several hobbies, commas, like reading and playing video games. There are many reasons people go to college, such as learning new skills, making more money, and meeting new people. Where's the dependent clause here? Again, it's at the end, such as learning new skills, making more money, and meeting new people. If I remove that from my sentence, I am left with, there are many reasons people go to college, which is a complete sentence. So I need to separate this from the rest of the sentence with a comma. I also have another comma rule operating here. Can you find it? I have 3 items in a list. So I needed a lot of commas in here. My sentence should read, there are many reasons people go to college, comma, such as learning new skills, comma, making more money, comma, and meeting new people. So far we've looked at examples of sentences where the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence. But sometimes the dependent clause can be at the beginning of the sentence, and we usually call this introductory information. The rule is the same. Separate the dependent clause from the rest of the sentence with a comma, or in this case, place the comma after the dependent clause. Last week we started a new topic in class. What part of that sentence at the beginning can I remove? Last week. Now I'm left with we started a new topic in class, which is a complete sentence, and so I should separate last week with a comma from the rest of the sentence. Last week, comma, we started a new topic in class. How about this one? At my sister's wedding, I cried like a baby. The dependent clause here is at my sister's wedding, so my sentence should say, at my sister's wedding, comma, I cried like a baby. These are 2 examples of introductory information that are used to designate time. Introductory information can also be used to give a reason. To pay for his tuition, Jack borrowed money from his parents. The dependent clause here is to pay for his tuition. So my sentence should say, to pay for his tuition, comma, Jack borrowed money from his parents. Sometimes the dependent clause starts with a conjunctive adverb. These are words like however or therefore. Here's an example. Although I want to get my degree, I sometimes find it hard to come to class. The dependent clause here is, although I want to get my degree. As we talked about when we learned about complete sentences and sentence fragments, this does have a subject and a predicate and a verb, but because it starts with the word although, it's not a complete sentence all by itself. So we need to separate it from the rest of the sentence with a comma. The sentence should read, although I want to get my degree, comma, I sometimes find it hard to come to class. Introductory information can also just be a single word, like this. No, I will not do your homework for you. Here the introductory information is simply the word no. The sentence should say, no, comma, I will not do your homework for you. So now we've seen examples of sentences where the dependent clause is at the end or at the beginning, but dependent clauses can also come in the middle, and we typically call those interrupted clauses or interrupting phrases. The rule here is still to separate the dependent clause from the rest of the sentence, but in this case, you're going to put commas around the dependent clause. Here's an example. John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963, was the first Roman Catholic president in the U.S. What part of that sentence can we pull out and still have a complete sentence left? What if we said, who was assassinated in 1963 is our dependent clause? Without that, the sentence we have left would read, John F. Kennedy was the first Roman Catholic president in the U.S. That's still a complete sentence. So who was assassinated in 1963 is our dependent clause. I need to put commas around that. My sentence will now read, John F. Kennedy, comma, who was assassinated in 1963, comma, was the first Roman Catholic president in the U.S. But sometimes our dependent phrase that's in the middle, that's an interrupter, isn't that obvious. What about this example? That is not the best method, though, to completing this assignment. Here, the dependent phrase, the interrupter, is just that one word, though. If I pluck that out, I have, that is not the best method to completing this assignment, which is still a complete sentence. So I need commas to separate though. My sentence should read, that is not the best method, comma, though, comma, to completing this assignment. Our next comma rule is how to use commas when you're directly speaking to someone. You need to use a comma to separate the name of the person to whom you are speaking. Let's look at two examples. Patrick, when will you turn in your homework? Well, who am I speaking to? I'm speaking to Patrick, so I need to separate his name with a comma. Patrick, comma, when will you turn in your homework? How about this one? Will you please help me with my paper, Ms. Young? Who am I speaking to here? Ms. Young. So my sentence should read, will you please help me with my paper, comma, Ms. Young? The last comma rule we're going to discuss is how to use commas with questions. The rule is to place commas before question words and phrases only when the question is at the end of the sentence. Let's look at two examples. Fran Tarkenton and Joe Montana were great quarterbacks, weren't they? What are my question words here? Weren't they? So I need to separate them from the rest of the sentence. My sentence should read, Fran Tarkenton and Joe Montana were great quarterbacks, comma, weren't they? Here's another example. Commas are tricky little buggers, don't you think? What are my question words here? Don't you think? So I need to use a comma to separate that question from the rest of the sentence. Commas are tricky little buggers, comma, don't you think? That was a lot of comma rules in a very short amount of time, and comma rules are frustrating for almost all students. The next video will give you some practice in using comma rules before you need to practice on your own. If you get stuck or have questions, review this video, look at the commas section in your textbook, or reach out to your instructor for help.